You're watching BCTV. We're all about Branford. You're watching BCTV, Branford Government Television, a service of Branford Community Television. This program is brought to you in part through the support of the town of Branford.
Okay, we're going to get started with the Town of Branford Board of Finance regular meeting, September 27th, 2021. And first on the agenda is to approve minutes of the August 30th, 2021 meeting.
So I read through the minutes, and I think they reflect accurately what the August 30 meeting was about, so I move to accept. I'll second that.
Thank you. Motion's been made and second. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Next is citizens communication. Where we set aside approximately 10 minutes or so for anyone from the public who would like to make comments with regards to tonight's meeting. Is there anyone who'd like to come forward or speak? With none, we'll move on to the item. You know what? Sorry, we did receive I did receive an email from Wayne Cook, and I'll give this to the clerk, and she could be part of the minutes. Number 3 is to hear a presentation of the fiscal year 2020 audit by Clifton, Larson, Allen, LLP. And we'll invite Ron Nosek up to the table. Ron is the partner in charge. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I think you have a slide deck printout in front of you that will cover the topics I'm going to talk about. We can move through it rather quickly. I do have some financial highlights of things I want to go through, just the scope of the engagement, reporting results, some financial highlights, and then required communications that are standard communications derived out of AICPA that we're required, your auditors are required to communicate to you, those charged with governance. So we'll go through those. If you have any questions while I'm moving through, please feel free to stop me or hold them till the end, and I'll address any questions you have. If I can't answer it tonight, I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can with an answer.
Thank you, Ron.
So I'll move through the reporting slides pretty quickly. I'll slow down and make sure we're all on the same page when we get to the reporting results, or financial highlights, I should say. But the terms of the engagement, or the scope of the engagement, if you will, if you think of this, if you thought of it as a pyramid, the primary set of standards that we perform the audit under are generally accepted auditing standards. So that is the primary work we do on the financial statements relevant to gaining enough evidential matter in order to express our opinion on the financial statements. We're also required, because you receive state and federal funding, to perform this under generally accepted governmental auditing standards, which climbs its way up this pyramid and it adds a little bit extra layer relative to our responsibilities to gain an understanding of the internal control system relevant to financial reporting. So how does all the financial information get gathered and finalized in order to produce financial statements? So we need to gain an understanding of the internal control structure around that, and then also gain an understanding of the compliance requirements relevant to the town that, in our opinion, a violation thereof would be deemed material to the financial statements. And then finally, the top of the pyramid, they sit side by side, if you will, is the federal single audit and the state single audit. We are required, obviously, to perform work relevant to both your federal funding and your state funding, because you receive a high enough level of funding in excess of $750,000 in federal funding triggers a federal single audit. $250,000 of state funding triggers a state single audit. So we're required to perform single audits over both your federal funding and state funding. Those are very similar to the governmental auditing standards in that we're dealing with internal control systems and we're dealing with compliance requirements. The only difference is the focus is solely on the major federal program or major state program as opposed to the overall financial reporting mechanisms within the town. So reporting, relative to the reporting results. So the primary opinion under generally accepted auditing standards is page 1 of the bound document of the audit report. We've issued an unmodified or clean audit opinions on the financial statements, which generally state that, in our opinion, the financial statements fairly represent the financial position and results of operations of the town for the fiscal year ended June 30, in this case 2020. I say opinions when I said that because there are actually multiple opinion units in each governmental financial statement. So we're not just issuing one opinion, we're issuing actually opinions over your governmental activities, your major funds, which are in the case of 2020, general fund and capital projects funds, and then all of the aggregate remaining funds get rolled up into one column, and they too become a standalone opinion unit. So materiality is set on each individual opinion unit. The level of work we perform is done on each separate opinion unit. Under the governmental auditing standards, again, we're required to report to you any internal control matters that we detect and deem to be either significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, and then also to report to you any compliance and violation of compliance requirements that we deem material to the financial statements. There was a deficiency in internal control that was identified and deemed to be a significant deficiency. We'll talk about that at the end when I go through the required communications. And relative to compliance, there were no instances of non-compliance or other matters that were noted that we would be required to report to you. Under uniform guidance or federal single audit, again, we're reporting on compliance and we're reporting on internal controls over the major federal programs in this case. There were no deficiencies in internal control over compliance that were identified, and there were no violations of compliance that we detected during the performance of the work over the major federal programs. And on slide 7, I do list the major federal programs that we tested as part of the federal single audit for the fiscal year ended 2020. So that was Child Nutrition Cluster, Special Education Cluster, and under Department of Homeland Security, the SAFER grant. State single audit, same results. There were no deficiencies in internal control over compliance, and we issued unmodified opinions on the compliance relative to the major programs. Again, I list them here. You've got a Department of Transportation Harbor Street Culvert Project through OPM and Local Capital Improvement Grant, and then through State Department of Education, the Office of Early Childhood. It was an early care and education program that was deemed a major program and tested for purposes of state single audit. So that would wrap up the scope and the reporting requirements, and all of that information, quite honestly, is the only thing in any bound document that you have that belongs to us, the auditors. Everything else, financial statement wise, is actually management's financial statements. We do assist in the preparation of those, but management owns those and is responsible for those. We just opine on those. Relevant to financial highlights, I'm on slide 9 now. This is a snapshot of the balance sheet, if you will, as of June 30, 2020. Highlights here that I like to walk you through, so to speak. General fund, the total fund balance, and I've got all of the areas that I'm talking about, and I realize these are 25, 35,000 foot views on all of this. But all of the areas that I'm talking about, I have highlighted. I hope they did print out on that slide deck. Okay. So your total general fund balance at the end of the year was $37,252,270. $28,993,999 of that was unassigned fund balance, and that unassigned level represented 23.9% of total fund expenditures and transfers out for the fiscal year. In your capital project fund balance is $26,923,044, You do have a relatively significant receivable sitting in there, a little over $10 million as of June 30, 2020. That was predominantly represented by reimbursements due to project expenditures. It's all due from the state of Connecticut. We have not begun any work relative to 2021. I don't know where those stand now. I understand we're talking about relatively ancient history here, talking about June 30, 2020 financial statements, but that is where they stood as of June 30, 2020. The next slide, again, focusing on those two major funds. This is the operating statement, if you will, statement of revenues, expenses, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. Total fund balance in the general fund increased year over year by $4,653,003, and that's on a GAAP basis as opposed to budgetary basis. And this was due primarily, there's a budget statement in here, so we'll go through that, but it was primarily due to the fact that your actual revenues outperformed what you set the budget, your projected revenues relative to budget, and your expenditures were managed well under what the appropriated or the appropriations were for expenditures for the fiscal year. So clearly you're gaining on the revenue stream and you're controlling the expenditure stream. So that's going to generate some surplus. The capital project fund, total fund balance, as I stated earlier, $20,759,642 at June 30. And that was actually the increase year over year, and that's really solely due to a $45 million debt issuance that transpired during fiscal 20. Under governmental accounting, debt issuance comes in as another financing source as opposed to commercial accounting. It would just slap right on the balance sheet as a liability. So the next slide is your budgetary statement for the general fund. And my focus here really is that far right column, the positive variance, or the variance, be it positive or negative. I'm presenting to you all of the revenue functions and the expenditure functions, the original budget, final budget, and then what actually happened. So your actual data relative to those. So if you look at it from a budgetary perspective, fund balance increased $3,830,013, so a little bit less than the GAAP fund balance, and that really is primarily due to how encumbrances are handled under GAAP as opposed to under budgetary. But again, if you focus out on that right-hand column, you'll see all the positive variances that were recognized relative to the revenue function. So overall total revenues came in a little over $4 million in excess of what the revenue projections were for the fiscal year. And then if you go down into the expenditure section, you'll see that expenditures, again, working towards the bottom of the overall variance, you had a positive variance of $2,982,088 overall of your expenditures. And again, you can see function by function where those the variances lie. Overall, when you look at it from the perspective of a budgetary variance, it basically generates a budgetary variance surplus of a little over $7 million. You basically get to the $7 million by the fact that your revenues outperformed by 4, expenditures outperformed by 2. Your original budget, if you look down at that last line, your original budget was planning on taking $2.8 million from fund balance. There were also additional appropriations that were passed during the course of the fiscal year that actually really increases what you were expecting to pull from fund balance in order to balance this budget. So that went up to $3.2 million, $3,214,557. So effectively, what we're saying here with your modified budget is that you were expecting a deficit of $3.2 million, and you actually obtained a surplus of 3.8. So that again is going to get you to that $7 million budget variance. The next slide is your long-term debt, and this is just a table out of the notes to the financial statements. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this really providing it to you just so you see the ebb and flow from beginning balance to ending balance for the fiscal year. The one thing I just always feel compelled to bring your attention to is the net pension and the net OPEB liability. And in this case, the net OPEB liability is rather tremendous news. Probably not to you. You guys were involved in all those decisions. It was tremendous news to us as the auditors when we saw what had transpired. But that net pension liability at the end of the fiscal year is $42,515,714. The OPEB liability is just under $295,000. The next 3 slides actually are really similar information. The first is the police plan. The second is the volunteer fire plan. And then the third is that OPEB plan. And these are basically the ebb and flow of the liability year over year. And it's also giving you historical information back to, in the case of the fire police plan, 2014. In the case of the fire plan, 2015, and in the case of the OPEB plan, back to 2017. They don't go back further because we don't have the information relative to that, but it'll build out as you move forward. But what I do have highlighted and what I always think is of value is to see that that funded percentage that you have in the plan at the end of each fiscal year, and you can see the ebb and flow of that plan as you move along. Now, in the cases of the fire plan and the pension and the police plan, the liabilities actually went up. The funding percentage went down just a tad year over year. But the fact of the matter is, the contributions you made to the plans were actually in excess of the actuarial determined contribution. I'm not an actuary, but if you believe in actuarial science and make the contributions like they're telling you need to make, you are going to fund the plan over time appropriately. So I applaud you for being aggressive on that end. Finally, relative to the OPEB plan, as I stated, and you can see that thing is 99.09% funded. So effectively, it's fully funded at this point in time. The contribution that was made to the plan was far in excess of the actuarially determined contribution, which you were well aware of, and that's really what put that into a funded position. The police and fire, if you add up those liabilities, they won't tie out to that total pension liability on the grid that I had a few slides forward. That's because there's in that liability, there's also a couple of state plans that you participate in. You don't really control those, so I don't know what the value is to present that information to you. You can't contribute more. You can, you're basically making contributions based on what the state of Connecticut tells you need to contribute. So, but there are other liabilities relative to the MERS and the teachers plan that are in there. So finally, to end my time here with you, just real quick, we'll go through the required communications. And again, these are promulgated by the AICPA. These are topically, all the bullets, if you will, are not things that I make up or my firm makes up in order to talk to you or communicate to you relevant to things that we think are important. These are standardized communications. The purpose of them, per the AICPA, and I do believe this, in essence, what they are designed to do is to vet out any instances that may show or present bias on behalf of management relevant to the financial statements. Meaning, is management trying to make the financial statements look better or conceivably look worse than they are as of the reporting date of the financials? So from the perspective of qualitative aspects of accounting practices, this really represents the estimates that are embedded in financial statements. So the life of your assets, so that affects depreciation levels. Your net OPEB liability is an estimate. The pension liability is an estimate. So those are all significant estimates that are in the financial statements. We evaluate those year over year, and from a conclusive perspective, the financial statements, in our opinion, financial statement disclosures found to be neutral and consistent and clear. Difficulties encountered in performing the audit. There were no difficulties from a personality perspective, but we did experience delays. Clearly, we did experience delays in completing our audit due to delays in the financial close process, and that is related to the finding that we'll talk about when we get to that point. Uncorrected misstatements. So these are what we call past audit adjustments. So they're minor or de minimis in nature. They're below materiality, and sometimes we'll talk to management relevant to something we found, and we may pass on posting that adjustment, and management may pass on posting that adjustment. That adjustment. That was the case here. There was one past adjustment related to Board of Ed impressed account that is carrying a year-end balance of $255,000. I don't know who's familiar with an impressed account or not, but typically they're zero. They're basically the bank balance is equal to the amount of outstanding checks against that bank balance, and so the reconciled balance is zero. That's not the case here. Board of Ed is, from our understanding, is continuing to vet that out and figure out what generated that balance. So I would assume it's going to be resolved within the next fiscal audit. Corrected misstatements. So we're required to report to you any material corrected misstatements. There were none, so there's nothing to report. Disagreements with management. No disagreements arose during our audit. Management representations. This is just to tell you that we do request a management representation letter from management that was dated on August 4th, 2021. Basically, it's about a 9-page document that expresses the fact that management owns the financial statements and takes responsibility for the financial statements. Management's consultations with other independent accountants. To our knowledge, no such consultations occurred. This would basically fall under a scenario where management perhaps didn't agree with a position we were taking, be it relevant to GAAP or auditing procedures, and they reached out to another firm to get a second opinion. Significant issues discussed with management prior to the engagement. All of our discussions occurred within the normal course of our professional relationship, and our responses were not a condition of our engagement. So that's basically designed to vet out duress. If we were told we do X, Y, and Z, or we don't do the work, we'd have to communicate that to you. Significant findings or issues that were discussed or subject of correspondence with management. This again relates back to the significant deficiency in internal control over financial reporting that was identified. The deficiency was related to the collection of delinquent taxes in the tax collection office. And that was and is in both your federal single audit and state single audit documents relevant to the governmental auditing standards report, and it's listed as finding 2020-001. It's in both of those and written out in detail as to, or summary, if you will, as to what had transpired. So that will conclude what I was going to discuss with you this evening. My contact information, along with Mike Popham, who is the engagement manager or director, is in there if you care to reach out to either of the two of us. We would prefer communications came through the finance office, but if any of you call, we're going to take the call and do the best we can to give you an answer as to what your inquiry is. So I'll take any questions you might have at this point.
Thank you, Ron. Charlie?
Ron, on slide 9, under fund balance, the non-spendable, 18,000. What is that?
Non-spendable fund balance is basically inventory. Usually it's inventory. It might be some other.
Oh, I see. Okay.
There could be other things that fall into that, prepaid expenses, things of that nature.
Okay.
Probably, given that it's in the general fund, it's prepaids.
Okay, one other question. Like, on slide 17, where you said management consultations with other independent accountants.
Yep.
if management disagrees with, say, your auditing thing, and they want to reach out to another firm to get another opinion and perhaps strengthen their argument, what's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with it.
Oh, I mean, well, then why do you have to report?
Because the AICPA deems that something that you should be aware of.
Oh, okay.
Okay, other questions on the audits?
Chairman, point of clarification.
Sure.
Under 18, regarding the deficiency related to collection of working practice in the tax collection office.
Excuse me,
Okay, sorry, okay. Regarding 18, the deficiency related delinquent. When this occurs, do you meet with the first selectman, the director of finance, the tax collector? I mean, you write it up, it's here, we have both discussions that you put in, both documents on page 9.
Yep.
Which gives good headings and certain general, sometimes specific language. But where do you go from here on that? You just leave it here with us?
Yes. If it were, really our responsibility ends with communicating to the next level of management, to be quite honest with you. That is a little of an odd situation here because the tax collector is an elected official here in town. But in the case of this issue, first I would say that we believed and verified that the amounts in question were immaterial to the financial statements, and it was not something that we detected during the performance of our procedures. It was something that was communicated to us during the performance of our audit from a member of management or employees that work in town. So our responsibility at that point was to go to Jim. Jim, at our request, went to the first selectman. And from that perspective, our responsibilities relative to communication are done. We do have, by accounting standards, the requirement that if we feel as though a criminal violation occurs and we're not satisfied with the position or reaction that management has taken, where we would be required in that case to go to the authorities, but that is not the case here. So, in summary, if you will, that's what our responsibilities are.
So that your staff that was out in the field there doing it, did they have any interaction with the tax collector on these issues?
We worked with the tax collector's office throughout the engagement. Yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Relative to this particular pointed incident or incidents, I Mike Popham ran that field work. I can get an answer to you. I don't know if he interfaced with the tax collector or not.
Well, I think it's significant because it's.
Maybe I'll step in here, Harry, for a
Go ahead.
second. Is that, and what again, as you pointed out, Ron, it's some of the overview and some detail is included in the Single Audit and the Federal Audit Act. And I also might point out that it's the Board of Finance that engages the auditors. So technically they work for us, okay? Yes, they interact through the first selectman's office and the finance office, but they report to us and they work for us. So what I'm going to do is to just, in order to move through this tonight, is to touch on some of the details that are in this report. And it's basically, as Ron pointed out, on page 9, it says, with regards to the financial statement findings and the tax collections, it's the type of finding a significant deficiency in internal control over financial reporting. Then I'm going to go to the cause, on page 10, again, not hitting all of the specifics that are here tonight. The cause is controls within the tax department were either insufficient or the controls were circumvented or overridden to allow the occurrence of above noted items. Their recommendation is the audit recommendation, the auditor's recommendation, is we recommend, and not to put words in your mouth, but this is CLA, correct?
Correct.
We recommend that the town review the procedures in the tax department, specifically the procedures over the collection of taxes, the reporting of unpaid motor vehicles to DMV, and the record retention policy. These processes and procedures should be formally documented and enhanced to ensure compliance with all laws and regulation. And then there's a response from town's leadership, which says, in the opinion of the town leadership, that the presence of an elected tax collector is seemingly anachronistic, given the complexity of today's modern tax system laws and compliance requirements. As a result, the town is contemplating code or charter revisions to change the position of tax collector to a non-elected position. Again, that is not the position of this board, but it is included in this audit. So my thought for tonight is that we would adopt the resolution, which I've drafted in some rough form, which states, I propose this, resolve that the Board of Finance adopts the fiscal year 6/30/20 single audit report financial statement findings regarding tax collection. The Board of Finance chairman shall confer with the town's auditors, the town council, and the town's finance director in order to improve internal controls within the tax department and to recommend other changes or improvements as appropriate.
I'll move the resolution.
Motion's been made and seconded. Discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I recuse myself.
Please note that Bob has recused himself. Thank you, Robert. Any discussion, Charlie?
Hey, Jim, will these findings have any effect on our bond rating? Do you think?
No, I don't believe so. I think the operative word that Ron used was materiality. It would not be out of the realm if they ask about it, because they do see the audit, primarily when it relates to the collection of revenue, because one of the things that they look at is your operations, revenue, and expenditures. Fortunately, the town has done well in that area, as he's pointed out. So I don't think they will, but we anticipate that we could get a question.
Other questions? Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to express?
No, just, again, if you got any questions, I'm more than happy to address them.
Okay. Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, next on the agenda is to consider, and if appropriate, approve a request from the Sustainability and Compliance Manager for the following budget transfer for the current fiscal year. From contingency, $56,000, into consulting services, $56,000. Jim, what's our contingency budget at this time?
With the items on tonight's agenda, if this and the other contingency transfer were to be approved, it would be $716,892.
768.
$716,892.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Okay. Diane, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Good, thanks. Diana, so we did receive your letter. Would you like to hit the highlights of this and where this is taking us?
Sure. Also, I handed out, Lisa handed out on my behalf, Just two spreadsheets that I wanted to share with the board to sort of set a little context. Because I don't know how familiar everybody is with the solid waste budget. It is definitely a large, broad-reaching budget and department, and probably not the most glamorous one to follow. So I thought I'd provide this just so we have a little background. The bigger one that you're seeing here, I'm sorry, everybody else does not have that. These are all different recycling revenue streams and the credits that the town has earned from these recyclables over the past, 10 years or so. So the recyclables that you put out at your curb, you take time to wash and dry, hopefully you dry them, and put them out at your curb, sorted, then get collected and processed, brought back to the transfer station, and eventually sold off on the market, right? So that's been a revenue stream for the town. And various different recycling markets appear and disappear over time, and that's sort of what we're looking at here. At the high points, we were seeing anywhere from $120,000 to $140,000 a year in recyclable credits. So that's one piece of the solid waste and recycling pie. The other one I just want to bring your attention to is the other spreadsheet I've provided. And this one looks at just more of a closer snapshot, about 6 or 7 years. So it's got the recycling credits on one end, which 2016, 17, 18, we're looking at, some solid numbers that look good. And then also the cost of disposing of recyclables. So when the markets fall out, when they no longer want our plastic or our glass or our cardboard, it goes from a revenue to being a cost, a burden of the town. And so you're looking at the same, 6 to 7 years back to back here. And there's been a huge increase in the cost over the past 4 years of having to dispose of these recyclables where the markets have dropped out. And there's a variety of reasons for that. Or at least we can assume there's a variety of reasons for that. One being there was something called the China Sword, where China just sort of decided, okay, I'm cutting off all recycling ties with the United States. I don't want your material. And they stopped buying it from us. And they were the ones who really were pushing single stream, right? While most towns went to single stream, Branford stayed very strategically at a sorted recycling program. And that's really benefited the town financially, believe it or not. The cost that we pay right now for disposing of recycling and waste is a lot less than what a lot of other towns pay for. For example, our tipping fee at Covanta is about $64 a ton, and other towns are paying upwards of $95 to $140 a ton. So there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to waste and recycling. But when you look at the difference between the credits that we get for selling off our recycling streams versus the cost, they've changed, right? So now we're paying a lot more to dispose of our recycling than we are earning credits. And so that's definitely impacted our budget. So that's just a little background I wanted to give you on that, just so you have it for fun, to read later on. So the Solid Waste Commission has been dealing with how to address these issues. So they're aware of what's going on in the market. They understand that there's a problem. We know that other towns are not even as successful as Branford right now when it comes to recycling, but Branford is not at the level it used to be. And we believe it could be. We believe that we can, swing it back the other way so that it's more of a revenue generating process from our waste and recycling. So out of the conversation of watching the markets and watching the budgets, really, the Solid Waste Commission came up with an idea to do a study, to hire a consultant. And their first step in that direction was to draft a scope of work, which they came up with, and to put out a request for proposals. The request for proposals was deliberate, not a bid. A bid's very restrictive. It's very rigid. A request for proposals allows experts in the industry to come at us with what their recommendations are. They have time to do things like that. They are more tuned into all of the nuances of the variety of markets that are out there right now. So that's what they did. They presented a scope of work. We presented it to Jamie. We got approval. That was the recommendation to go out. We went out for proposals, and we got back 6 different proposals, and they were, anywhere from, $40,000 to $99,000 for a variety of different work. The one that we went through a selection committee, a selection process. We shortlisted the proposals we got. Then we interviewed the short list, the candidates who we really enjoyed reading their proposals. And there was a clear winner of RRT, just the expertise in the industry, the knowledge of the markets, evaluating the markets, their experience in the state of Connecticut. And it was just a clear winner, no-brainer on who would be a great consultant for this type of project. So we weren't sure exactly what we would be looking for financially, so we didn't set a price tag on that. We were curious what the market would communicate back to us. And so that's how we landed on this consulting proposal from RRT for a real comprehensive waste and recycling evaluation and study for the town.
So, Diana, where does this take us? As far as if Mr. Shelton were to ask me next year's budget or the budget after, is there any capital expenses anticipated in this?
Well, I'm hoping that there is a great impact. I'm hoping it's a positive impact on our budget. I'm hoping we start to turn the tides and get back to where we were as far as our recycling revenue. But it's a 10-year plan. We're asking this consulting firm to come back with a 10-year plan, utilizing all of the resources that we have in the town departments, in the community, down at the transfer station, their knowledge and expertise. We're hoping that, what comes back to us is something that is less expensive than what is going on every single year as far as our program and our processes increases. Jamie, did you want to add to that?
Joe,
Sure.
if I just may add, yes, thank you. Because I think there was a lot of focus regarding the recycling market, which certainly impacted not only every municipality, not only across the state but beyond. They're all faced with that. I think, but I don't want to lose sight, and where that's through the information that Diana has provided, very clear. We can see what that impact has been over the last 4 or 5 years. However, I think there's some other subtle impacts to our budget. You may recall, I think it was roughly around 2012, 2013, the Solid Waste Commission went out to bid. They had 2 proposals. In 2018, around that time, they went out to bid. They had 1 contractor bid on our collection service. So I think there's an argument to be made that are we getting competitive pricing for how we collect our municipal solid waste, the curbside collection and recycling. There's, as Diana mentioned, this is a pretty large department in terms of cost associated with it in comparison to others in town. It's probably our single largest contract that the town holds. But it also entails a lot of different components. It's how people are sorting, separating their waste and their recycling, how that is then set at the curb. The process of collecting it is a separate contract, where those are being delivered and the markets they're going to, and how those markets are handling, because that has a trickle-down effect on our costs. So it is very comprehensive. There is very wide in terms of where cost impacts are hitting the town, other than just the recycling costs and credits. I just think that's important. So I think when we're looking at it, I think from what I heard from the commission, who decided to move forward with this study, is that they want to look at, this isn't a matter of, tweaking. We don't expect one aspect of it. It's not a matter of, hey, help us with communication so people are sorting to how we want them to sort it under our current system. This consultant, as Diana had mentioned, has a lot of expertise in this field, knowledge of the markets, experience with Connecticut regulations regarding waste and recycling. So they're going to come back with a recommendation that may actually have a change in how we're doing or handling our recycling and waste now. But the goal is to get some control on these escalating costs, as well as what we often strive for, provide stability for a number of years out, so we can have avoid this continuing volatility within the collection.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jamie. I guess one of my questions before I turn it over to other board members is that there's times when you do a study, then that leads to capital items, and that leads to bonding and other authorizations. And so do you anticipate any of the capital requests coming as a result of the study, or is it more based for the operational budget?
This is more looking at the operational budget. I don't anticipate, any capital projects coming out of this, but I wouldn't say that it's out of the realm. We have asked them to look at the difference between continuing to outsource one of the system that we have now. So if one of our issues is quality control at the curb, and there are residents out there who have sent us videos of the curbside collector mixing recycling in with the trash, and we don't want that. So if the end result is a recommendation to, you really need to own your own collection process, then that'll be the recommendation at the end of the study. And that is one thing that the Solid Waste Commission has asked them to look into. They want to see, the economics between both of those processes. But as far as, a big capital project down at the transfer station, I don't anticipate that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and Joe, I would just add, if something, we're looking at the total cost. So
Right.
If something was to be recommended self-perform, obviously we would come back and evaluate, or they would evaluate the total, the cost and the cost impact, as we do.
Thank you.
everything.
Questions, Charlie?
What's the timing of this study, Dan? When do we get to see the result of this 10-year plan?
About 18 weeks,
18 weeks?
16 to 18 weeks. Yes, sir.
18 weeks.
From when, I believe from when it's approved or after it's been voted on at the next RTM meeting.
Funding is in place, so if it
Yeah.
were to pass tonight, goes to the RTM next meeting, funding is in place.
18 weeks after
The
it's passed.
contractual, the contract that states deliverable in 18 weeks. But the goal is really, to try to, get this back and have understanding, prior, so we can make some decisions if there has to be a change in contracts, and we do have some contracts that are expiring June 30th, 2022. So we want to be in good shape.
Yeah, it's from when we go out. I'm sorry if I may just
Yeah.
add.
We got it.
Thank you. In order to start new contracts July 1, we need to give companies the opportunity to make sure they have the right equipment, which is roughly 3 months. So, June, May, April. So our RFP timeframe is around the end of February, March, and we need to give this organization time to review our contracts so that we make sure we're going out with our best foot forward.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
Robert?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a couple of questions. So when I look at this chart, so it's cost versus credits. So we're not going to get any higher credits, correct?
I think we will.
How do we do that?
It's a great question. So I think of the process as, think of like a chain, and every link is a little broken, needs a little TLC. And so we need to work on that. The first issue with these recycling streams is subject to the market, right?
Correct. And you
So-
have no control over that.
We don't, right? And I can tell you right now, scrap metal has been the best friend to the town of Branford for the past 10 years. That market has been stable. Over the past 4 months, we've seen the cardboard market come back tremendously. I think last I checked, it was about $60 a ton that we were getting. So we see that market come back where a year or two ago it wasn't at that price. Same thing with bottles and cans, plastic and glass. The indicators are that there's things coming down the pipeline with these various markets, and so they do shift, they do change.
Yeah. So that's, I guess, part of the resolution, right?
That's part of the resolution.
Only
yeah.
part of it. The rest is operational.
Some of it is operational, some of it is educational. So I, don't want to put anybody on the spot, and I won't question your knowledge about how good you are at curbside recycling in town.
Oh, I'm excellent.
I believe that, but I'm sure, I'm sure if I was to list off a few materials, people would say, oh, I actually don't know what to do with that, or that goes in my blue bin. And there are little tiny things like that we can work within the community to correct, so that we know the materials going out at the curb are the best stream possible for us.
So we're going to stay with dual stream, not go to a single stream. Is that kind of what?
Yeah, I think we actually want to go even further away from single stream. We want to try to get back to, 3, 4.
Uh-huh.
We actually have dual stream is sort of, I would say it's inaccurate for the town, right? You think of dual stream right at your curb, but really people sort their cardboard. They have their paper materials, and then they have their bottles and cans. So you have 3 streams there. What happens when the collector picks it up is something we're working on. So that's another process that has to be fixed and resolved. But then when you get to the transfer station, you have a variety of other materials that are collected down there, another 10. Some of them have market value right now, and some had market value, a few years ago, and that will continue to shift. But Branford has a great transfer station, a great facility right there for sorting a variety of materials. So the state of Connecticut is coming down real hard that they're trying to move everybody away from single stream, and we're already positioned very well for that.
So what are you going to do to discipline the vendor to make sure that they're doing this correctly?
Honestly, it's like we can't do enough. We have a real tight process in place right now. Folks call in and they say issues that are happening. Sometimes they can provide us with photo evidence, video evidence. Sometimes it's just, we know the folks, they've called week after week after week, there's issues, and we implement fees accordingly, fines and fees accordingly. I can tell you over the past 12 months, those numbers are just increasing every single month. So
the fees that they're
fees,
paying?
yep, absolutely, yeah.
Which means they're not doing their job.
Correct. Yeah, there's a problem there. We report them. We are working with them. Every time something happens, we'll report. There's only so much I can do as far as, reprimanding a company for having to cancel a recycling route for 3 days because their crew is in quarantine. There's only so much I can do, right? But for some of the other issues that are happening, we report them, we make recommendations, we're working with them regularly to try to correct some of this stuff.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions? Jamie, did you have something?
Just to briefly, just to wrap it up, that's more questions. But, I think what Bob is really touching on is the compliance end of it, or those who are adhering to. I think, going to a single stream will never have any credits, right? It's all liability. Right. And that's where Branford's been fortunate that we have maintained a level of, multi-stream recycling. What we want to do is see that when we set that up back, 20, 30 years ago, is that still does the market and the industry, is there still a market for how we're, even though we have a couple streams, glass, for instance, okay? But there may be some things happening in the industry right here in Connecticut where that liability that's, impacting those credits significantly. Now we can we may be able to pull that out and bring that somewhere else, bringing up those credits on that other material that was, still may have some value, and then bring that glass to somewhere where it's less costly to dispose of, or perhaps eventually get to a point where there is a credit. So these are all the things, it's more than just, looking at how we're doing it today and getting people to do it correctly. The rules, not for, have, that's a part of it, but also the rules have changed, the state level and in the industry. So that's what we have to, that's what we made it very, there's a comprehensive look at how we're handling material.
Thanks, Jamie. Other questions?
Joe, I'd like to move it.
Sure.
I think this will help us put our arms around our own operation here in town. Personally, I've seen some things happening with collections that's occurred, and there's a lot of changes nationally. I have a little bit of experience. My son actually worked for a broker that was buying recyclables, and it is a big mess out there. And I think there's a good step for Branford to be able to put your arms around it and move forward and address the issues that might be affecting us.
Thanks, Jeff. Motion's been made and seconded. Additional discussion? All in favor? Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck. Number 5 is to consider and if appropriate, approve a request from the assessor for the following fiscal 22 budget transfer from regular wages and salaries, $14,726, and from seasonal and part-time, $4,402, for a total of $19,128, transferring into overtime, $19,128. Welcome, Barbara Neal, our assessor. How are you?
Welcome. I just want to say the last time I was in front of the Board of Finance for a transfer was in 2002 when we came in for a transfer for a new company to do revaluation.
So you've got a pretty good record there.
Yeah. Okay, this request is, we lost 2 full-time positions and 1 part-time position. We were able to fill 1 full-time position, and we've had a very difficult time filling the other and also the part-timer in my office. So the staff has been working, they'll actually work a half-hour lunch. They'll come in early, not necessarily work late. Well, I have 2 that are working till 5, but so my overtime budget in the budget year was a little bit over $8,000, and I'm already almost 2/3 through that. So grand list time is coming up, and so I don't want to be in a hole and not have money to complete our grand list. So I'm looking to take these 2 positions that are in my budget that have not been filled at this point, and it's through September of this year. These amounts are through September of this year, and put them in overtime so we can complete the grand list. Hopefully we will hire somebody, but the market is not good. If you go to the CAO website, there's several towns that are looking for assessors and clerks and part-time, full-time help, and people just are not moving from one town to another. I don't know whether it's the times, they're content where they are, they just don't want to move. One of the problems with my full-time position is the pay, but we keep trying. We interviewed 4 people last week, but we haven't found anybody yet. So I want to be able to complete our grand list and be able to get that done. I only have 1 person out doing permit work along with a vendor, which has been very difficult this summer. So, because if that person's out of the office, then we're shorthanded in the office too. So that's the purpose of the transfer.
Thanks, Barbara. Questions?
I'll move it.
Been
Second.
moved by Jeff, seconded by Victor. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda, number 6, is to consider and if appropriate, approve a request from the finance director for the following fiscal 22 budget transfer from fund balance, $450,000, into police retirement, $450,000. Received a letter from Jim with regards to this. Jim, would you like to hit the highlights on
Sure.
this?
Actually, the auditor probably set the table a little nicely when he's showing the 20 net pension liabilities and showing that our funded ratios kind of hovered in that low 70 to high 60 range. And we've taken opportunities in the past to put extra dollars into the pension plan. We did some extra dollars during the budget process. And as we approach the end of the 21 year, we had roughly $465,000 a balance in the contingency fund, which would then have, under normal circumstances, flowed back to the fund balance. Our actuary reports, GASB 67 and 68 reports are already completed for June 30th, 21. So rather than have the actuaries rerun those reports, the way to accomplish that when you look at the two fiscal years side by side is to take 450,000 from fund balance in the current year. So, so if you look at the two side by side, they ultimately wash. This will help us on the funded ratio, and down the road, we're going to have to start incorporating, or at least I believe we should incorporate some of the new mortality tables. So that typically has an impact on our future liabilities. On the other hand, there may be some other things we could look at, some of the other assumptions, primarily like some of the wage increases, which have been lower than what's assumed. So essentially, the dollar amount we're looking at is $450,000. If you were to approve that, then we would make another payment into the pension fund in addition to what's in the current budget.
Thanks, Jim. What's the current budget amount for 22?
Let me just check that. It's a little over $1 million and change.
Now, I note that on the auditor's presentation that they did highlight that the unfunded liability actually percentage went down from 71% to 68%, although it seems to have fluctuated over the past couple of years. Is that primarily due to investment, or is that other reasons?
Well, what would have had, it would be a combination of things, investment, and
Investment
also, we did actually, although it wouldn't be a huge driver necessarily, but we did then convert to the defined benefit plan as well.
Yep. So there's multiple factors that would affect that.
Yeah, I'm looking for it. I thought I had it in here.
That's all right, Jim. It's, I
I
think,
thought it was in here, but.
$1.3 million. Maybe your assistant
Just looking
assistant
up on
finance
the-
director may have it.
Gotta be about $1 million
Trick
too, right?
question. Excuse me?
It's probably about $1 million too.
Your budget resolution with this, increasing the size of the budget? Is it,
Yes.
okay, I don't see one on the agenda.
So,
Pardon? Oh, you got it, okay.
thanks for that.
All right, thanks, sorry, I just didn't.
It's $1,190,000.
Pardon?
The contribution is $1,190,000 next year
And that's
for the year one.
So the prior year we put in $1.3 million. This is $1,190,000. So the proposed resolution on this, if we so consider, is resolved that the Board of Finance recommends to the RTM an increase in the appropriations for the fiscal year 2022 general fund budget from $120,515,315 to $120,965,315. This increase will be funded through an appropriation from fund balance and will be used to increase the police pension contributions. That's for consideration. Do we have
What was the year before?
It's been moved and seconded. Questions, discussion? All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Next is item number 7, to consider and if appropriate approve a request from the finance director for the following fiscal 22 budget transfer from contingency 6,500 into software 6,500. And Jim's request is to provide a debt management tracking software application. Jim, you want to go over this with us?
Basically, there's myself, Catherine, and Irene in our office. We're looking at a program that basically tracks our outstanding debt and the payments. Also does it for leases. It also helps us in putting together reports for the auditors. I mean, currently, the way we're managing it is I have a directory with a series of spreadsheets in it, which works, but it's really, I'm sort of like the single point of failure, so, and you start looking long-term and, you try to build in systems where you're not necessarily relying on one person and some of the calculations. We were looking at this program and we thought it was would be good for that purpose. In addition, only one person can use the file at a time, the way it's currently designed. And so for example, if Irene, say for example, gets a call from state of Connecticut on a payment, goes into a notebook, that prints it out and does that. Coincidentally, many years ago, we did have a program that was given to us for free. Now, CLA presented the audit. If you go back, it was Bloom Shapiro. Prior to that, it was Scully and Wolf. The firm Scully and Wolf had given us a program at the time to help comply with some of the GASB changes. But obviously, with all the changes, they never kept it up to date, and it was free. So it's not like we had any recourse to ask for them to do some programming improvements. So this is kind of a something that could take the place of that. And also, we've gotten into more leases now, primarily on the school side. When you look at your capital budget, you look at the staff laptops, you look at the children and Chromebooks. So, those leases would then be put in that as well. So basically, it's much better than the current system that we're using, and it's also backed up into the cloud. In future budgets, I'm going to try to convince Debbie to put it in her budget because ultimately that's where they are. But I didn't think it was fair to ask her to ask for a product that primarily is flying under the flag of the finance department. So
this would cover also track Board of Ed leases?
Yeah, we would, because those would go on our book. Well, they're on our books now, but yes, they would be put into the system.
So are they contributing to this? Have you asked them to help you with that? Okay. Questions? Been moved by Victor, seconded by Harry. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Jim. Good luck with it. Next is a discussion with the First Selectman and the Finance Director regarding the American Rescue Plan. And Jim has sent us a note stating that Branford's allocation is for the town side is some north of $8 million. And we've received over $4 million to date. So, Mr. Finch and Mr. Cosgrove, would you like to explain what's going on?
Yeah, I'll start, and I got the easy jobs, and Jamie will fill in whatever I miss. But so when this stimulus package, the 1.9 trillion that you've read about on the news came about, one of the things we've been doing is, you've gotten a handful of emails from me over the months related to this, whether it's communication from our Congresswoman DeLauro's office, whether it's initial estimates, and then there were the county dollars that had yet to be determined. And I also sent initially the 150-something pages of regulations from the Treasury, and then there's been some guidance after the fact. Essentially, it's very detailed. There's some gray areas to it, although they seem to coalesce around a number of themes. In our case, we got $8,257,000. You get it in two halves. We got $4,128,000 in June, so you'll see that showing up in a future audit. We're what's called a non-entitlement unit. We're a municipality under $50,000. So our allocation, we pull that down through the state of Connecticut's Office of Policy and Management. The areas that are primarily of focus are public health, negative economic impacts, investments in water and sewer, investments in broadband, and revenue loss. And myself and the First Selectman, and we've had some brief conversations with the chairman, is that the revenue loss, while it may be attractive for some communities, is not something that we were looking to pursue when our fund balance has been growing. Now, if you were a community with a much different makeup, the revenue loss may make a lot more sense. So, for example, if we had significant revenue due to parking meters, parking garages, transit facilities, hotel taxes, I mean, this is written for communities all over the country, then that revenue loss may make some sense. And so, and then there's a time frame in terms of when you can use the dollars. Eligible costs have to be incurred after March 3rd of 2021. And then you have till December 2024, as long as they're obligated, encumbered by December 2024 and expended by 2026. So, and some of the other things that we're looking at is how does this relate to some of the things we've already either appropriated or committed to? Is there an opportunity to either reduce future debt or reprogram existing debt, do redesignations to achieve some of our goals? But up until this point, there really hasn't been a lot of discussion on this. So I think what we're trying to communicate is really those items that are kind of in the FAQs. How much did we get? How can they be used? What's the time frame for using them? And what are the sort of major areas of focus that the government wants to see us spend the money on? And we'll talk a little bit later in the next item, but there's also a federal budget that's being discussed in Washington as we speak, and they're talking about $3.5 trillion perhaps or less, and that may have some dollars flowing our way in addition to this as well. So as I said to Joe in a conversation we had this afternoon, sort of never in my career have there been such a focus on what's going on in Washington as there's really been in the last year. Normally, in a normal course of things, we'd be more focused on what's going on in Hartford, but given all of the activity at the federal level and its impact on municipalities, that's where we're turning our heads these days to find out what's happening.
Thanks, Jim. And so there's one of the questions that I had, and I think the board might have, is, how do these dollars get allocated? And that's really, I think, down the road working through that, because it's essentially I guess, an unsolicited grant to some extent, and that we've seen because of the pandemic, and the approach is to try to be as transparent as possible with how we're spending it. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of guidance out of OPM. There's a guidance, that's out of the U.S. Treasury, which is about 30 pages or so, and there's hundreds of pages of regulations that go with it, but it doesn't necessarily mandate that we go through our process, our budgetary process. But I think that's something we're working through to say how, what's the most transparent approach to allocating these funds, and that would be the next step.
Yeah.
Jamie?
I mean, Joe, on that note, about the guidance, let me just first say, probably a month ago, I attended a COG meeting, and, out of the 14 communities represented in the room at that meeting, I think, you heard a variety of ways that communities, towns, cities were contemplating spending their money, and also looking at the process in which they would do so. I think Jim touched upon the fact, we want to look at, what the makeup of our town is, and what we're, how to expend these dollars. $8 million is significant, in terms of dollars, but also, we also have to adhere to the guidance, of which we expect additional guidance coming out probably later this week from the feds. So we await that. However, in terms of what we've been considering and looking at, I think we want to stay faithful to the intent of this funding, of what it was for. I think that'll serve us well. I think not only do we have an obligation, I mean, rather than playing, seeing how we could make it fit and spend it somewhere. I think if we stay as faithful as we can to the intent as written and as the guidance provided, it'll serve us well in terms of just ensuring that when, if looked at, change in administration in Washington or change in the makeup of Congress, that these dollars are intact. So I think we will be looking at a significant part of it going towards capital, such as projects that may have an economic development benefit. Our sewer and resiliency, certainly top of that list. However, I will say that we are looking at providing some dollars towards the human needs services. However, when doing that, and we've already had some preliminary discussions with the area foundation, we want to ensure that it's the impact is sustainable. So as Jim mentioned, these dollars need to be earmarked by obligated by 2024, expended by 2026. Again, following the guidance, and with that, they want the measurable outcomes. So considering that, all of that, we want to make sure, however we apply some dollars towards it, it ends up having a sustainable impact in a model that can be carry on beyond these dollars. And I think there will be also some dollars going towards arts and culture, but these are things that we're looking at, and we're looking at ways of how they would be considered. But to your point, Joe, about I think we want to do it in a transparent way, and I think we want to do it in a way that we're all familiar with, which I believe is going through similar to the budget process, Board of Finance, RTM. So as needs are identified and uses that we feel faithfully adhere to the intent of the funding, we'll bring those forward to this through the appropriating bodies.
Okay, thank you. More to come on that. Questions from
Yes.
Jamie, Charlie?
Hey, Jim, my experience, with these kind of funds is, the feds send the money to the state sends the money to the companies or the businesses in the community, and then they give you the parameters of how you can spend it, as you've said. But at the end of the time, when the state auditors come in to audit the use of your funds, did you do it correctly? There's a recoupment if you haven't spent it correctly. Is that part of this too?
Well, we feel so.
Well,
I think that's, it's yet to be determined what that process will be. I don't know if Jim can shed some light on it, but that's why I think it's important for us to stay as close as we can to what the guidance being provided, something as black and white, and we feel that that's a use that we can use it in this paper. I think we stick to that rather than trying to be creative with our use of these dollars. I think we try to adhere to the intent.
So what you try to do is overspend in the areas that they think are important.
Not
and then you overspend.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure if those are the right terms.
Yeah,
But still, I think what I can do is we could share the guidance, as there is compliance and reporting guidance, which gets back to your point of, so that's 34 pages.
Yeah, and
give you
Joe, if
some
I just might
highlights.
add with that, an eligible expenditure is a consultant to ensure that we're compliant with our expenditures. I know many municipalities are beginning to draft RFPs, RFQs for those types of services. So it may be something we may want to consider.
Victor, you had a question?
Yeah. With regard to economic impact, I know you sort of passed over that, but from our self-insured medical, has there been a spike in medical costs because of COVID?
Actually, we haven't really seen that, Victor. If any, remember also that a lot of folks were staying out of the hospitals, and for example, in the current year, our ambulance revenues are lower than they were in other years. I think people weren't wanting to go to hospitals, so Branford hasn't really had a huge COVID spike. And, as far as I'm aware, only on the town side, and it's somewhat anecdotal, is I'm not aware of a lot of employees being out for COVID-related things or quarantining because they've had family members that have had it. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. So I don't think it's been a major impact. And on the workers' comp side, I think we've only had like a few cases there as well. So,
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Jim, on that. And with regards to the Board of Ed, did they also receive these types of funds?
yeah, that's a good point. In my letter, I emphasized that it doesn't include the Board of Ed. I'm not really a good spokesman for the Board of Ed on this. The Board of Ed has gotten, they've gotten dollars over the past year and various ESSER programs, but in terms of how that is being spent,
Do you know how much that is by any chance?
I don't. I'd have to try to look it up, but that's something I could reach out to the schools and ask them.
Yeah, okay. Why don't we talk about that?
Okay.
Because I'd like to know what process they're utilizing as well. If we're utilizing our standard allocation process, I would hope they're doing something similar. But either I'll reach out with you or directly to them. Thank you. Any other questions for Jim or Jamie on this? Is mainly a informational item. Okay, thank you, Jim, Jamie. Next, number 9 is to discuss a plan to issue refunding bonds pursuant to resolution adopted earlier this year. And Jim has provided us with a fair amount of detail with regards to the potential bond refunding. So, Jim, you want to take this away?
Probably one of the comments I made on the last item about keeping eyes on Washington is certainly appropriate here. And that is, you may recall last February when the Board of Finance approved a resolution for refunding bonds, which was also approved by the RTM. One of the things that we were contemplating was the impact of changes to tax law, allowing municipalities, governments to basically do advance refundings. And just to give a general concept of that is an advance refunding occurs when you refund outstanding debt prior to 90 days outside the call date. And so why was that significant? Well, because the only way you could do advance refundings is if you sold it on a taxable basis versus tax exempt. And tax exempt typically sells at a lower interest rate than taxable. So if you could do a tax exempt deal, you would have more savings. At the time we discussed it, I think the prevailing point of view was that, the advocacy groups and other Washington watchers, the GFOAs, Government Finance Officers Associations, the bond lawyers, the financial advisors, and others, were basically hopeful that this would be something that would be remedied because it seemed to be a high priority. The infrastructure bill did not provide the relief. That was one of the things we were waiting for. As you know from watching the news, they're engaged in their budget process now. The federal budget year starts October 1st. I'm not going to miss this deadline this year, I think. But currently on the House side, there is a bill I believe is sponsored by a gentleman from Massachusetts to restore these. But as you know, in that process, the House has to kind of figure out where they're going to land. And you read the same news reports we do. There's groups within the House that have different positions on this, whether the size and the scope. And so that has to play out. And then the Senate, there has to be that reconciliation process. So this thing is going to either, we'll know or not know, or, in the next few weeks, potentially. And, one of the things I think that we're looking at is that, while folks may be still trying to run the clock on this one, the question is, do we, at this point, move forward? And I know it's a trite expression, but I think it even came up in one of the approval processes. I think it was probably at an RTM committee. It's kind of the bird in the hand, two in the bush argument, right? So if you know that you have savings that you can do now, maybe you should consider doing that. And when we talk about savings, I think I want to emphasize the broader context, and that is that, the town of Branford has done a number of refundings over the years. Whenever it makes sense to do, we've done. We've even refunded the Clean Water Fund. Then the state sent a letter out basically sort of restricting that in the future. And we've always sold debt. Most of the outstanding debt that's down there now was, I think probably all of it was when the town was AAA. So whenever the town enters the market, they're going to get the most favorable rates based on our bond rating. So that would give us low rates. Tax exempt rates are lower than corporate borrowing rates. And when the interest rates move in our favor, we've done refundings. We've done advanced refundings in the past when they were allowable. So this is really sort of that last level of optimization in a way. And the money that we're giving up, we could actually kind of make back by shortening the maturity. So I think probably a good place to go is the worksheet that looks like this. It says a range of refunding options. And when you look at that, I just label these A, B, and C. Now, as I said earlier, the ability to do advanced refundings currently does not exist. That's part of the legislative remedy. So B and D would not be allowable. So then the question is, do you want to wait for that, or do you want to move with A and C? And the recommendation that the preferred way I would go with this is to look at C. And what C does is, you're going down the road looking at doing this on a taxable basis. The dollars that you would save from a budgetary basis over the years is about $1.8 million. On a present value basis, it's $1.092 million. And what that does is that gets you fairly close to what a tax exempt deal would be if you didn't restructure it. So if you were looking for a savings target as an individual and you said, well, I could do my mortgage 15 years as opposed to 20 or 30, you get the savings by shortening the maturities, which kind of brings me to the next sheet. If you look at a sheet that looks like this. So what this pretty much does is it looks at our existing debt payments, and then it shows the impact of doing this refunding under the new structure. So you'll see that the refunded bonds cost about $17.1 million over the life of the bonds. The refunding bonds would be about $15.3 million over the life of the bonds. If you net those two numbers out, that's your $1.806 million, which you saw on the other sheet. And then, just like a consumer would, if you wanted to shorten your mortgage, you wouldn't necessarily make that decision in a vacuum. You'd want to know, well, how does that affect any other spending you may want to do down the road, any other obligations you may incur. So sort of in a pro forma way, I said, okay, well, if we did a restructure and then we just overlaid it with a sale of roughly $10 million a couple years out, how does that look with our overall, debt service as a percentage of the budget? And you can see it stays relatively flat for a couple of years and then gradually goes down.
So Jim, that's the future new bond monies
Yes.
plus interest.
Yes.
So that's the 11,968 is the potentially a $10 million bond issue with associated interest.
Yep.
Over the lifetime of the bond.
Yep. And then we look at it in the context of, how does the debt service play out under that scenario? What's our debt service as a percent of the budget, which we typically try to keep at 8% or less. And so I think that answers the question that shortening the maturities to get the savings on a taxable basis doesn't unduly tie your hands going forward, unless somebody has a $60 million project they throw at us, down the road. But I don't see that happening in my tenure here. So anyway, so there's that aspect to it, and the only thing that when I make this recommendation is, and maybe it's my nature, is that I have to sort of live with the regret premium. If down the road there is a legislative remedy a few months after we've done this, or there's a continuing funding resolution, which Congress has done in the past, in which this gets thrown in there. But if the board takes the approach that we have a good debt profile now, we issue debt always at low interest rates, or whatever, as low as we can get at the time of the market, and that this is a way to achieve savings, then we still achieve savings. It's not chump change, and then we did a workaround to get that savings. And I want to also emphasize that this is what's called a negotiated deal. So when you issue debt in the marketplace, you have really two kinds of structures. You have a competitive sale, which is like, okay, we're going to issue, like we did when we issued the $45 million, we're going to issue $45 million in debt. It's going to be on such and such a date. We're going to take offers from underwriters up until a certain point in time, and then we award it based on the lowest true interest cost. When you do a refunding, you typically do a negotiated sale, because there's other aspects of the refunding, as you probably saw from the handouts. There's the sizing and escrow, there's premiums, which there could be on competitives too, but there's all these other variables. The other benefit of a negotiated sale is you could actually pull the deal off the table. So sort of our drop dead period on this, when we could pull the deal off the table, would be at the end of October, because you'd have to pull it off before you went out and did your pricing. So we're not going to let the underwriter's desk run this sale unless we're going to go through with this. And the benefit of that is, if we think through our best guess and advocacy groups that there is some movement on the advanced refundings, then we would pull it off. In the next week, I've asked for numbers to say, well, what would happen? Not quite a shock test that our banker friends might do on a deposits and loans, but basically to look at it and say, okay, what would happen if interest rates went up 100 basis points from now, so 50 basis points a year? Is that a reasonable scenario? Could be. I mean, what the Fed was talking about, tapering and stuff. And then we would sell at tax exempt, because we'd be within 90 days of the call date. What does that look like? So that's another thing we're going to be looking at. But right now we are moving forward. We're actually putting together a bond prospectus with the intent to be in a position to price at the end of the month, but also retain some level of flexibility that if the legislative environment changes, we could actually pull it off. And what we wanted to communicate to the board was kind of what we're thinking, get your feedback, what our strategy is for enhancing the savings to offset the tax exempt taxable difference, and to show you that restructuring doesn't unduly tie our hands for any future issues down the road, unless they are a very large unanticipated issue.
Thanks, Jim. So at this point, your options are only to issue taxable bonds for refunding. And so really the two scenarios that Jim has shown us is that is a scenario, which shows a savings of some $507,000, and the other C, item C, which is included in his estimate there, which shows a savings of a present value of savings of approximately $1,092,000. So those are really the only options right now, again, because the ban against issuing tax exempts in order to refund. So Jim has worked with the advisors to restructure the maturities in order to enable the savings and also give us some flexibility for future bonding. So again, we're not the experts on this, we understand it, but Jim is working with the experts. And I think that you've done your homework for sure. So do you need a resolution from us, or you just need a consensus of the board, or what would you look for?
Yeah, just some consensus would be
Yeah.
fine, or is there something that I'm not considering, or is there a benefit of waiting?
I think, again, you're closer to this than we are. You've engaged the experts. Do we have questions for you, or comments?
Are we going to receive a funding fee?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Are we receiving a funding fee once we do this?
When you say, are we receiving, you mean like
Part of it.
when you say a refunding fee,
Are we receiving income once we refund this?
no,
Time fee?
no, on the, I think I know what you're
There's no
asking.
premiums.
On the taxable side, one of the things that we're not getting is the premiums. So on a tax exempt issue, you typically get a bond premium. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right.
No, there is no premium.
Yeah, there is no premium on the taxables.
So under the B and D, there would be premiums paid, and you've earned those in the prior. You've been awarded
Yeah.
those in the prior based on some of the other refunding, but not on this. But
Yep.
other questions,
I think
Victor?
it's a great start.
Seems like a no lose, so.
It's a good strategy, Jim, and I think again, it's your caution and analysis is very well taken, and we support. At this point, we're supporting your the presentation that you made, and if things change before the end of October, then I'm sure you'll take advantage of it. But keep us posted. And again, we've already authorized this refunding some time ago, and now it's a matter of the timing of when to pull the trigger on this. So thank you for the update. Okay, number 10 is adjournment. With no other business to come before the board, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Been moved and seconded.
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
This program was brought to you in part through the support of the Town of Branford. Watch town meetings and other videos on demand at BranfordTV.org.